Imagine waking up to find out the US has slapped new tariffs on Canadian goods, making everything from cars to electronics more expensive, or that the Keystone XL pipeline project has been restarted without any warning. Trump's policies could have a massive impact on Canadian life, affecting everything from cost of milk to job security. Some of these changes could seriously disrupt life here in Canada. Stay with me because we are uncovering the unexpected ways Trump's next big move could reshape Canada's future. Canada and the US are best friends until something shakes up our partnership. Every time Trump changed a policy last time, Canadians felt it. From new tariffs to oil policies, it created major waves that disrupted businesses, jobs, and even cross-border travel. Now, with Trump's new term around the corner, Canada might be in for another round of these America First surprises. So, what's coming our way? Let's look at the first 100 days of Trump's proposed changes and why we should be paying very close attention to these. Economic and trade relations. First up, trade. Trade is the backbone of Canada-US relations. But Trump's America First policy made it a battleground last time. If Trump reintroduces tariffs, it could mean big trouble for Canadian industries. Remember what happened with the 25% tariff on Canadian steel in 2018? That single move cost Canada's economy nearly $16 billion in 1 year alone. This time, it might be even more intense if new tariffs cover other major exports like cars or lumber, which could lead to price increases on products Canadians use every day. Canada's exports to the US make up more than 75% of its global export, and the US is by far Canada's largest trading partner. In fact, about 30% of Canadian jobs are tied to trade with the US, which means these tariffs could directly impact employment here. Energy sector shift. Now, let's talk about energy. Trump's previous stance was all about US energy independence, with aggressive moves to boost oil and coal production. He approved the Keystone XL pipeline, which would transport Canadian oil from Alberta down to Texas. But it was later suspended under Biden's administration, sparking environmental protests. Now that the Trump is back, there is a chance this pipeline could get a green light again. So Canada might see a boost in oil exports, but the environmental trade-off could be huge, sparking a nationwide debate once again. Canada exports about 3.7 million barrels of oil per day to the US, and almost 99% of our oil exports go straight to the American market. While a pipeline project might help Canada economically, it also increases carbon emissions, which has led to strong pushback from environmental groups and indigenous communities. Supply chain and manufacturing. Trump's Made in America focus could also mean changes for Canadian businesses, especially in manufacturing. When Trump slapped a 25% tariff on Chinese goods, many Canadian companies had to adapt quickly to avoid costly US-China tariffs. If Trump returns with even more tariffs or domestic manufacturing incentives, Canadian manufacturers might face supply chain disruption, potentially leading to higher prices on things like electronics or appliances. Since the 2018 tariffs, the Canadian government reported a 15% increase in production costs for certain manufactured goods. This increase came from rerounding materials to avoid tariffs, causing Canadian companies to hike prices. If new tariffs target other sectors, it could further increase these costs, impacting Canadian consumers directly. Border security and immigration. Next up, immigration and border security. Under Trump's previous term, the US saw increased border wait times and stricter checks on Canadian travelers. Canadian businesses that rely on US talent or tourism could face new obstacles if Trump's hardline immigration stance returns. Canadian students and professionals who look to the US for opportunities might find themselves stuck in a maze of red tape. During Trump's presidency, Canadian applications for US work visas dropped by 5%, and border crossing wait time increased by as much as 30 minutes on average. And that's according to a USCIS report. If this trend resumes, it could lead to slower business transactions and less fluid cross-border movement. Environmental policies and climate goals. Climate policy is another big area. Canada has committed to ambitious climate goals, but Trump's administration previously rolled back emissions regulations and prioritized fossil fuels. During his first term, the US became the world's largest producer of oil and gas, which posed stiff competition for Canada's energy sector. If Trump resumes these policies, Canada might face a tougher time selling its clean energy solutions, potentially forcing us to scale back on green investments. In 2019, Canada had to lower oil prices to compete with US production. If Trump doubles down on fossil fuel again, it might keep global oil prices low, hurting Canadian oil revenue and slowing down our climate initiatives. Defense and security. Trump's America First policies also included pushing NATO allies like Canada to increase defense spending. With Trump back, Canada could face renewed pressure to meet higher defense funding targets, which might mean shifting federal dollars away from social programs or infrastructure. By 2020, Canada was spending around 1.3% of its GDP on defense, below NATO's 2% target. If Trump's administration pushes Canada to increase this spending, it could impact other critical areas of our budget: technology and digital policies. Let's shift to tech. Trump's last administration targeted Chinese companies like Huawei, citing security concerns. If this trend continues, Canada might face a decision to align with the US on tech policy. With 5G infrastructure on the line, Canadian telecom companies could feel the heat to ban or restrict certain technologies, potentially driving up costs and limiting tech options. Huawei's potential exclusion from Canada's 5G network could cost telecom providers an estimated $1 billion in infrastructure changes. The result? Higher telecom costs could be passed down to Canadian consumers. Investment and currency. Investment and currency fluctuations are another area that could see major changes. Trump's economic policies led to a surging US dollar, which in turn pushed the Canadian dollar down. A lower Canadian dollar can make imports more expensive, impacting the cost of everything from electronics to groceries. After the US corporate tax rate was slashed in 2017, foreign investments in the US surged, leading to a strong US dollar. A stronger US dollar typically weakens the Canadian dollar, which makes our imports more costly and can drive up inflation here. Agricultural and food exports. Canadian farmers also have a lot at stake. Trump's administration supported US farmers with increased subsidies, making Canadian exports less competitive. Our dairy and grain industries especially felt the squeeze last time. If US farming subsidies ramp up again, Canadian farmers might find it harder to compete, impacting rural communities and food prices across Canada. In 2019, Canada's exported $5.5 billion worth of agricultural products to the US, with dairy and grain leading the way. However, US subsidies meant that Canadian dairy products struggled to compete, potentially leading to lower revenue and higher prices locally. Tourism and cross-border travel. Tourism from the US to Canada also took a hit under Trump's travel policies. Cities like Vancouver and Niagara Falls rely heavily on American tourists, especially those from border states. If Trump's stricter immigration and border policies return, we might see fewer American visitors and a blow to the Canadian tourism industry. The 2017 executive order banning travel from several countries saw a decline in US travel to Canada by nearly 5% in the following year. If similar restrictions return, it could mean lower tourism revenue for Canadian hotspots. That's a wrap on 10 ways Trump's policies could affect Canada, from economic shift to border changes. The ripple effects of US policy on Canada are huge, but will Canada push back, or will we need to adapt once again? The stakes are high and the road ahead is uncertain. To stay in the loop on all these developments, subscribe and hit the bell, because you don't want to miss what could happen next.